This is BMW's new and updated S1000XR crossover sports tourer for the 2024 model year. And so here are the 8 key things that you need to know about this bike. Now at the heart of it, we still have the big 999cc inline 4 that's heavily related to the engine you'll find in their S1000RR sports bike. But there have been a few tweaks and improvements to this updated model that mean it's a little bit more punchy. The primary difference is that there are new flow-optimized geometries for the intake channels and also a new dedicated map. And while peak torque remains the same at 114 Nm at 9,250 RPM, peak power gets a bump of 5 horses, going from 165 last year to 170 now, and that's made at the same engine speed of 11,000 RPM. So I wouldn't say it's an absolute night and day difference. If you've got a current generation S1000XR, then it's probably not worth marching straight down to your dealer to upgrade, but it does mean it looks just slightly more competitive against the other sports touring bikes on the market. If you're on a budget, then something like the Kawasaki Ninja 1000SX makes for a great choice, and that's around 138 horsepower. And then if you're at the more premium end of the market, then the comparable bikes are stuff like the KTM Super Duke GT, which comes in at 173 horsepower, or perhaps Ducati's Multistrada V4 Grand Tour, which is also 170 horsepower. Now this sort of power level, a few horsepower difference is neither here nor there, and this bike promises to be absolutely fast enough for the next model year. Now another little tweak for 2024 is that they say they've also updated their Shift Assistant Pro system, which is their fancy name for a quick shifter, and they say it's been optimized for this new engine map with even higher precision when shifting. The only downside is that it's a 345 quid accessory, so not every owner will immediately feel the benefits of this update, but certainly it's the sort of engine, you know, a litre inline 4 that you'll probably want to have the quick shifter spec'd on for that extra sporty feel. Now as for the chassis, I'm not noticing any massive updates for 2024. It's the same aluminium bridge frame, suspended on a 45mm upside down fork with their electronically adjustable dynamic ESA system, and at the rear it's the same aluminium double-sided swing arm with the monoshock, also with dynamic ESA. But they do say, however, that the spring strut has been optimized to provide a more sensitive and comfortable ride, so perhaps there is a slight improvement there in ride quality at the rear owing to that change. Then you've got 17-inch wheels at each end with radially mounted 4-piston Brembo brake calipers up front on twin 320mm discs and a single pot brake on a 220mm disc at the rear. Comparing the spec sheets between the two models, you know, last year and this year, I don't see any huge changes in dimensions. Things like the wheelbase are the same, the 20-litre fuel tank, but somewhere it has gained an extra kilogram, and I think that's probably owing to the extra standard equipment. And still, I'd say it's fairly slender for such a big bike at 227 kilograms curb, and you'd probably take the very slight weight penalty for some extra goodies. Now, one of them is their Headlight Pro system, which is their name for an adaptive turn-in headlight, and so as the bike banks over, the headlight system will illuminate the inside of a turn, which of course gives the rider a better view of any hazards or obstacles when they're riding at night. They also say that package includes their daytime running light, and so on the flip side, in the day that helps other road users to better see you. Keyless ignition is also another new standard feature, which I think is a nice upgrade on a touring bike like this. Some people like it, others not so much, but I think if it's standard fit, you'd probably take it rather than not. And there's also a USB charger as standard now to keep your phone juiced up on those longer rides. On top of all that, there's a 12 amp hour capacity battery, and again standard fit now too. The rest of the list of tech is carried over from the previous generation, so you've got a whole bunch of riding modes and rider aids, and that includes lean sensitive traction control and ABS, drag torque slip control, hill start control, and also their emergency SOS system, so you can hit a button on the handlebar to call the emergency services. And all this is managed through a 6.5-inch TFT display. It looks pretty much the same as the previous gen, but BMW dashes are so nicely designed and well laid out and easy to read that I don't really see any particular need for an update. And by the way, this is a great point at which to give a shout out to today's video sponsor, and that's Speedo Angels. You see, a TFT display like this can cost hundreds, if not thousands, to replace if it gets scratched or damaged. This particular model, for example, is especially steep, and yet Speedo Angels Angels' dash protectors cost just a few quid. They make them for most new bikes from all the major manufacturers, and so do check out the link down in the description below to get yours, and you'll also find down there a 20% discount code specifically for my viewers. So a massive thanks to Speedo Angels for their support, and with that, back to the bike. Now at the same time, they've also added a few extra interesting options to the accessories catalogue, which seem like they might have trickled down from the development of their super spec version of this bike, which is called the M1000XR. One would be the M GPS lap trigger, so effectively a lap timer for the track, and that is the intended purpose of the M1000XR, so why not make it an option here too? The other is the M Carbon wheel set, which can also be spec'd on that bike. And of course, reducing weight at the wheel is super beneficial, both in terms of the performance of the bike's suspension, but also changes of direction and acceleration and deceleration. Plus, they do look super bling, so they make a nice finishing touch, just providing you got the budget to spec them, which is going to be about £2,210. Now, another significant tweak for the new model year is a reworking of the ergonomics, with which they say they've tried to give it a bit more of a performance bias for both riding on twisty roads, but also potentially track days. The key thing that they've done to get the rider into a more aggressive position is lifted the seat height, so it's now gone from 840mm to 850. Now, while there are some options to go up or down in the accessories catalogue, I do feel like this might have come at a cost to some of the shorter riders who might have been thinking about buying one of these bikes. 840mm is already pretty tall if you're not particularly long in the leg, and maybe you're loaded up with luggage and a passenger, and so another 10mm up won't necessarily be appreciated. But I guess for the majority of taller riders or anyone who does want to ride this bike in a more sporty manner, perhaps it does make sense. They also say they've redesigned the handlebar clamp for this year, although from what I can tell in the pictures, it looks like mainly a superficial change rather than having any functional effect on the way the bike handles or the ergonomics. Now visually, there's a slight evolution on this bike with a few little neat touches here and there. So the tail section has been slimmed out to give it more of that hunched forward look, and that's been done with some new side panels but also revised air intakes. They also say the radiator trim now has a textured surface, and then the beak type thing at the front is now body colored to tie in with the rest of the paint job as opposed to the black on the previous generation. Naturally, you've got some tasty new paint jobs for 2024, and there are 3 in total to choose from. The base model is Black Storm Metallic, which is pretty typical of BMW to offer a most affordable black version. Then on top of that, for another 400 quid or so, you've got Gravity Blue Metallic, which I think is actually my pick of the bunch. I think it looks really good and with a little pop of color on the graphics. And then lastly, top of the tree is what they call Light White Solid Paint Motorsport, and that comes as part of the M package, so you'll need to pay quite a bit more for it. It does give it the most sporty appearance and almost gives it a bit of that M1000XR look. But yeah, a word of warning, it does cost over £3,000 for that package, and while it does include some nice goodies that are extra, like the Akropovich exhaust system, a smaller sporty windscreen, the M seat, forged aluminium wheels, the lap timer, a lightweight battery, and their endurance chain, you still can't get that paint job on its own. And so if you had your heart set on it, then you probably better factor this into your budget. As I always say though, looks are subjective, so do let me know which of the paint jobs you'd pick down in the comments below. Now price-wise, we're looking at £16,790 for the base model, or £18,340 for the TE version, which basically bundles in their dynamic package, which includes cruise control, dynamic ESA Pro for some extra suspension features, and the quick shifter, and then also the touring package, which gives you the center stand, tire pressure monitoring, a GPS mount, heated grips, a luggage rack, and some handguards, and it saves you a few £100 in the process. Now versus the previous generation, that is about £1,000 up on the base model price, so quite an increment, but to be fair to BMW, all bikes are going up pretty quickly at the moment, along with the price of everything else. So the Multistrada V4 from Ducati is probably a fairly decent external yardstick, and the most basic version of that bike comes in at £16,999. Adding some goodies though and some extra spec will quickly get you over £20,000 easily. And then there's also the KTM Super Duke GT that I mentioned earlier, which I think in 2023 at least started at £18,799. So whilst they're all substantial in price, we're not talking about the budget end of the market here, the BMW does look look relatively reasonable versus the competition. So that rounds off our guide to the new 2024 S1000XR. As always, I'd love to know what you think of it, so do let us know down in the comments below. And which of those bikes that I've just mentioned would be in your garage if money were no object? Do hit subscribe if you've not already to see more of the latest motorcycle news right here on YouTube. I'll leave you with my review of the Super Duke GT if you've not seen it already. Definitely a fun bike to ride, so one to consider if adrenaline is one of your top buying priorities. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next one.